Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. This is your host, Christy Haberman. I'm doing another practice episode of Grieving Insomniacs and being on camera. Bear with me as I get used to it. I noticed that the last time I recorded, I was not looking at the people that I was talking to. What are we going to talk about today? Well, there's several things that I want to talk about. I wanted to remind you about the podcasting I'm going to be doing on my memorial trip for Christopher out to the Oregon coast. That'll be starting on May 31st. I will probably do some shorts on YouTube and on Instagram, but we won't have a full podcast probably until I get back. It's one of the things that I'm doing to honor Christopher. And honestly, it's these little things that you do, projects, activities, creating memorials, are very helpful in your grief. At least they are for me. I went over the list of podcast episodes that I have done over the years. I have never done one on how do you know what kind of help you need? If you're a grieving parent and you are struggling and you think to yourself, I know I need help. I need help from someone, but I don't know what kind of options I have. I don't know who I want to see. I don't know what I need. I'm going to go over some of the options that you have for grief therapy and then go over the different types and just give you some information about that. When it comes to grief therapy, one thing that I want you to know, there's an awful lot of programs out there that say that they are certified. They are certified in grief therapy. This program will help you get over your grief. None of that is science-based. These grief therapy certifications that are out there do not have the research behind them to prove that they are effective. They have what we call anecdotal evidence, and anecdotal evidence is someone saying, I did this and it helped. The question is, was it time that helped them get over that? Was it some other factor that was part of that grief certification? Or was it just the support they received from the people? That's the first thing you need to know when you decide, well, what am I going, and what are the differences? The differences are you have the option of a grief support group. You have the option of individual therapy. You have the option now, I see a lot of people out there doing life coaching. They're putting Facebook groups, Instagram groups, talking to other people that have gone through grief, and we call that peer support for grief. I am licensed as a therapist. I have a bias towards utilizing licensed people to go get help from. And the reason for that is, as part of a licensing, I don't know what to call it, a licensing process, but you have to go get a master's degree. Now, the important thing about a master's degree is the educational piece tells you about the theories of behavior. And that's all it is, really. It's education. You learn about where psychology comes from, the behaviors, the theories, those kind of things. And then you go through what's called supervision. And supervision is learning how to be a counselor from other counselors. The important piece of the supervision is they teach you not to bring in your own beliefs about therapy or beliefs about people into the therapy session. An example of this is people that are overly religious. It's fine to be a therapist and be a Christian therapist. However, you put yourself out there as a Christian therapist. You say, I am a Christian therapist. If you don't want to talk about Christianity in your therapy, then you need to go to someone else. Where it becomes a problem is when you blindside people and say, oh, guess what? We're in the middle of talking about this problem, and my expectation is that we're going to talk about God, no matter what your beliefs are. And that's another important piece behind getting someone that's licensed. The other issue is multiculturalism, which is everybody comes from a different culture. Everybody. There's family cultures, there's area of the country's cultures, and there's an awareness built into that through the supervision process. I'm just going to put that out there right up front is my profession is counseling. I went into counseling for a reason. And so my bias is that you go to a professional. The first thing oftentimes gets recommended is a support group. Support group can be run by someone that's a peer supporter without training. It can be run by a professional counselor with training. But the important part of the peer support, and my hope is that the support groups are run by people that have already been there and they made it through on the other side of the process. In a support group, that's exactly it. They are there for you to talk about what's going on with your day, to support you, to provide different things, coping mechanisms, try this, try that, to help you overcome the difficulty that you're having with your grief. And there is a place for grief support groups in recovering from grief. And I shouldn't even say recovering, but I do believe there's a recovery process with grief. I know I've gone through one. The other side of this grief that I have experienced for the last 14 years, I am a different person. I have different thoughts, different beliefs about the world, and there are some long-term consequences from losing my son. The other option is individual therapy. Individual therapy is where you look up someone that lists their credentials and says, here, I treat this. What kind of disturbs me about that a little bit, there's an awful lot of therapists out there that say, I treat grief, because they think that grief is not something you need a lot of skill for. And they may not have lost anyone. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. I believe that people, women that have lost children, we are in a specialized group, unfortunately. And I believe that the therapists that people need to go to are other therapists that have lost children, and they are out there. Or go to a therapist that knows somebody that has lost children. They need to have at least some experience in it. The downside of going to individual counseling is in order to get it paid for by your insurance company, you have to get a diagnosis. Those can range from depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and then complex grief. I think it's complex bereavement disorder, something like that. That goes in your medical file for everyone to review. If you have concerns about that, individual therapy may not be where you want to go. When you go to the individual therapist, they're going to do an intake. And what that is talking to them about your whole life. Birth, how you grew up, what your life with your parents are like, the circumstances surrounding the death of the person, what are your cultural beliefs surrounding that. So they just do this whole array of, this is what we need to know about you. The benefit of that, in my eyes, as both a grieving parent and as a counselor, is that my grief is not in a vacuum. What I experienced before in my childhood, growing up, my family's beliefs surrounding grief, my family's beliefs surrounding me, all impacted how I am viewing my grief and how I'm experiencing my grief and how I'm making sense of my grief. Because really that is what grief therapy is all about, is the story that I am telling myself inside my head about the fact that my child died. And all of those things that I learned throughout my family is what is showing up during my grief. And I'll give an example. I'm pretty honest about it on this podcast. I was trained through parenting that everything was my fault. So there's a natural amount of grief or a natural amount of guilt when you're dealing with grief. There's this cultural belief for most women that our children will outlive us. And when they don't, that really challenges that belief system. Well, I already believed that everything bad that happened in my life was my fault. And then my son died. So now I'm really at fault. So for me, recovering from my grief, I have to delve into learning that not everything is all my fault. And most certainly Christopher dying was not my fault. And I still struggle with that throughout the years. I'll have these memories, and we all have them, of things we wish we had done better with our children. And I still feel guilt and shame because I think I should have done it better, right? If I had done it better, then he wouldn't be dead. But that's not reality. We call that reality testing. I do a lot of reality testing of my own thoughts. That's what a therapist is going to do, is going to help you walk through, okay, so these belief systems that you have developed surrounding the death of your child, how many of them are valid? Are they based in reality? And if they are based in reality, how can we help you cope with this reality? And that is the benefit of individual therapy. There is also group therapy. I live in a fairly rural area. I don't know that many people that have lost children that would be going to a group. And so the idea is in group therapy that all the group members are similar in that respect. So they got to have a common problem. You would have a group of, let's say, women, because women struggle with unique issues surrounding the loss of a child. Men, they have unique issues surrounding the death of their child also. Having a group of only women that are similar ethnic backgrounds, similar cultural backgrounds, and then you benefit from the therapeutic. The therapeutic process is basically working out your issues on the other group members. So the difference in the individual, we'll use my example before, that always thinking it was my fault. I think it's my fault that my child died. My group members are going to be saying, well, it's not your fault. How can it be your fault? And then through this process of interacting with my group members, and then hearing them say, well, I thought it was my fault too, or it was my fault too. The difference between that and a support group is a group therapy is led by a group therapist. And so they use the group process, we call it, to do the healing part. So after the group becomes a functioning group, they interact and help each other. And then the therapist is just there to keep the conversation going. In my rural area, I don't know that I would have gone to group therapy because there's some drawbacks to that. I don't know about anybody else, but I don't want to be vulnerable in a group. I just don't. And I'm in a rural area. I'm a professional. So in my case, I'm a professional counselor. So I'd get into that group and then I would start to try to take care of other people. Right? But you could be a doctor. You could be a lawyer. You could be a teacher. And you're in this group with your community members, and that can feel a little uncomfortable. Or you could be parents in your child's school with other parents that have lost children. But like I said, I live in a rural area, so there's maybe one or two, and that's not a lot for a group. You have to make yourself vulnerable if you're going to do it in group therapy. For me, it's a little bit better in individual therapy because then I can not worry about having to take care of other people. And that is my first tendency if I were to in a group. I feel the same way about the peer group, support group. In my local area, I am a therapist here. If I'm seeing parents in my group therapy or my support group session, I cannot see them for counseling because it's called a dual relationship. But there might be somebody in that group that I've already counseled before. So then I can't go to that group because I know more about them than I should have known about them. That also was not an option for me at the time. But it's also something to consider if you're going to a grief support group, is there might be people in there that you know that you interact in this other part of your life, and can you manage that? Can you manage the conflict that will occur? And it does occur because then you're in this situation. Maybe they're your boss and you go and you see your boss, and now you got to be a professional in talking to your boss, but you see him crying the night before over the loss of his child. It's a struggle. Then there are the tendencies. Some people like to hide. I don't know how to explain it besides that, where being in a group makes them feel safer. They don't feel necessarily so much on display as if they would in individual therapy where it's just you and the therapist. And so they can not feel so alone. And I think that's the other part of losing a child that I think it's hard for people to understand is there's such a wide array of emotions surrounding the loss of a child that some of those emotions bring about feelings of shame. Like, I am angry and was angry at my son for a long time. He knew our family history of substance abuse, that Our genetics predispose us to alcoholism. Knew that. He was a smoker. He was in nursing school. Like, he knew that smoking, I believe it is, don't quote me on this, but I believe it increases your risk of cancer. I looked it up one time. 5 times. Not only did he drink, but he was also an alcoholic at 25. And I'm angry about that, but he died. So like, how do you be angry at a dead person? Like, and how do you manage your emotions surrounding that? And how do you not feel bad about that? And then, how did I not know? We lived 3 states away from each other, but I didn't know. So there's all kinds of those emotions that are going to come out in these various settings, and then you have to decide which one is appropriate for you. In the beginning, a support group might be best, and then you move on to individual or group therapy. Sometimes individual therapy you need in the beginning, and then you need to go to grief support groups. There is no right or wrong about which avenue you choose. You just need to know that you have all of those options. So I guess that how you choose whether or not you go to one or the other is all based on personal preferences. You need to ask yourself, where are you in your grief process? If you were like me, sorry, got to sit up a little bit more. If you were like me and suffered with a lot of shame, the grief stuff wouldn't have worked for me in the beginning. I was so ashamed to talk about. And why? Because my parents parented me from a shame-based perspective. And so everything I did wrong, and in my belief system at the time, I believed that I did something wrong because my child died. Therefore, it was my fault. Therefore, I had shame. Therefore, I had guilt. If you don't know the difference between guilt and shame, guilt is when my behavior was wrong. Shame is me as a person is wrong. And many, many people in this world are taught that when they make a mistake, they are wrong. There's something wrong with them, not something wrong with the behavior. That's where I came from. So in the beginning, that was not an option. And I already had issues. I've been in therapy off and on for years before my son died. That didn't change anything. I would like to say that it changed something and I was better situated, had better abilities to cope. Nope. Made no difference whatsoever. None. And I was just struggling. It took a lot of years. In fact, I'm actually going back to therapy again because I'm struggling with the death of my son again. So I just want to remind you there's a saying in counseling. So you go to counseling for an issue that's this big, and then you make it about this big, and you go away. I don't need counseling anymore. Then all of a sudden, this issue comes back. Got to go to counseling for a while. It gets a little smaller. Oh, I can go away, come back. It's this big again. That's just what it's like. And I think grief is the same way. The issues that I had when Christopher first died are not the same issues. The issues that I am having now very much relate to Christopher, but they're more about the fact that I have cancer or had cancer. I've been through all my treatments now, just struggling with the side effects, and I lived. Christopher didn't. You want to talk about guilt? There's such a huge amount of guilt with that, so I'm going back to therapy. I need to. It's just part of the process. So how do you decide? Look at what you need. So when you sit down and you're crying and upset, what do you need in that moment? When you ask yourself, there'll be an answer. Just got to quiet the mind long enough to know what it is. I highly recommend meditation. That quiets the mind. So whatever the answer is, that's what you need. Do you feel like you've been abandoned, like you don't have any friends? Grief support group, probably a good option. Are you noticing that your grief is triggering lifelong issues? You're probably going to need some therapy. or both. Do your research. Like I told you, I'm not a fan of grief curriculums. What I would do is call therapists, ask them. I went to a therapist last July when I had just been diagnosed with cancer. I was really struggling. So if you're new to the podcast and you don't know Christopher's story, Christopher was diagnosed 3 weeks before he died. I was terrified. I was terrified I was going to die. And then I got to that 3-week mark, and I was like, I'm not dead. Then I got to the surgery. I'm not dead. I didn't die. I woke up. So happy to wake up. I did my radiation. I'm not dead. There were days I wanted to. Oh, man, that burning from radiation. Holy cow. But anyway, got through that. I'm still not dead. Now I'm a year out. Right before I go on my memorial trip, I'll be going through all my scans and everything again. And what if the answer comes back that I don't have cancer anymore and I survived? What's it going to be like then? So, therapy. So if you're in a place that's similar to that, you can't sleep at night. I feel like that's normal. I still have periods where I don't sleep at night, but it's gotten so much better. If you're having nightmares, if it's interfering with your daily functioning. When Christopher first died, I laid on the couch all the time, slept all the time. Like, you will know. Like, there'll be an urge within you to go to therapy. If you cannot afford therapy, go to community health centers. Go here in Rapid City, we have sliding fee scale agencies that go off of your income. And that's another thing. If you can't afford therapy, then the grief support groups are going to be your best option for helping you. I know that's a little difficult to hear, but, and then maybe through those support groups, you can meet some friends. I don't know if there's any bad things about any of them. All of them are going to cause you to feel uncomfortable. Therapy is uncomfortable. Going to the grief support group is uncomfortable. They're all uncomfortable. And why? Because you're vulnerable. That's the bottom line. In order to get where you want to be, you have to be vulnerable with how you feel. Some of you may need to learn what emotions are. That's a real factor in our society today too. But there's nothing bad that's going to come out of it. And some of the things we have to do to put aside is, you got to worry about the ugly face crying. I have people cry in front of me in therapy and they're like, I'm ugly crying. I know, ugly crying sucks. But we all need to ugly cry. There are times we just got to do it. Your therapist and your group leader should be supportive, non-judgmental, those kind of things. If your child died of suicide, I would highly recommend that you go to a suicide support group as opposed to perhaps a religious group. The last thing you need is judgment. And I about come unglued if anyone even suggests that my son is not where I want him to be. So you need to avoid those kind of situations to the best of your ability. If you're not a religious person, don't go to a religious support group. Even if it's the only option, there's online groups, there's Zoom, there's Instagram. The last one I want to talk about is life coaching. I see a lot of people, and I'm one of them. I want to help people with their grief. The difference being, I'm a therapist. And as a therapist, I recognized when my son died that one, therapists aren't trained very well in grief. Two, in order to be effective with grieving moms, you need to have lost a child. Be non-judgmental and empathetic. The difference with life coaching people is they may have the experience, but I don't know if they have the other skills that are needed. So one of the most important things about being a therapist is you do not tell people what to do. People have to have autonomy. And what that means is that the freedom to choose. So when I'm working with people, I do not say, I think you should do that. You have to do this. What I say is, I recommend this. They come back and see me the next time. How did you like my recommendations? Well, they didn't work. Okay. So then let's talk about what we need to change so that they do work. But there's no judgment in that. And I worry about that with people that don't know how to put their judgment aside. And that's part of that professional skill that people learn. So I really worry. And the other thing that I worry about is sometimes these people put out there that, hey, I know the way. Just follow me. Follow what I've done, do what I do, and you'll be better. So the person, and this would have been me, I'd have followed you. And what if I hadn't gotten better? I would think that it was me, that there was something wrong with me. That's why you never tell people what to do, because what works for him over there might not work for me. And what works for her may not work for me. Being able to navigate that with people, and then sometimes people can become very dependent on other people. And there's also a little bit of a worry about that for me. Because nobody has the miracle cure for grief. It's a process, it's a journey. You got to get through it. It's the only way. Whether you like it or not, time moves on. And so do we. And there's no fast way to get there. So thanks for listening. I hope that I provided some insight, something that you think that was beneficial in this conversation about which way you should look for help. If you have any questions, leave comments down in the description box. Thank you for listening. This is Christy signing off. I'm going to try to get better at recording on a more regular basis, and thanks for listening.